All right, it's just a minute after 2, so we'll get started with our welcome and introductions. Folks will continue to trickle in, I am sure. Just a reminder that we do have 75 minutes set aside for today's roundtable, which is focused on community-led research. And also a reminder that this session is being recorded. So if you unmute yourself to ask a question, that will be recorded, and we will be posting this online and sharing it with our network. So just a heads up for all of you. But once again, welcome to our community-led research training today. We are so excited to have all of you joining us for this topic. Before we get started, River Network has a practice of beginning our meetings by honoring and acknowledging the people whose traditional territories include the land that we live, work, and play on. We offer these acknowledgements not only as a symbolic statement, but also as a constant reminder to directly support, collaborate with, and honor the culture of Indigenous people all across our country. So even though we're meeting virtual today, just want to remind everyone how very important that is and to set our commitments and intentions to support the Indigenous people that we live and work alongside in our country. So as we dive into our content today, I just want to introduce our presenters. My name is Hannah Maiko. I'm the Community Organizing Associate for River Network. I live, work, and play on the traditional lands of the Odawa and Peoria tribes in current day Grand Rapids, Michigan. Deanna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Deanna Toledo. I'm the Leadership Development Director at River Network. And I am calling in from the lands of the Cherokee people, also Asheville, North Carolina.
Thanks.
Hi,
April.
everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm April Engel. It's great to see all of you logging in today. I am calling in from High Point, North Carolina, which is the lands of the Catawba people, and I'm a Science and Policy Manager at River Network. And I'll pass it to Sarah.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sarah Cannell. I'm the Education Director for Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council. I'm here to share a little bit about our community work. I'm calling in from Providence, Rhode Island, which is the lands of the Narragansett tribe.
And Paulina.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Paulina Lopez, and I am calling from Seattle. And I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the first people of Seattle, the Duwanish people, past, present, and we honor with gratitude the land, the waters, and our Duwanish tribe. I am the Executive Director for a local nonprofit environmental justice organization called the Duwanish River Cleanup Coalition. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So we are joined by Paulina and Sarah today, who are two of our network members who will be sharing their own experiences with community-led research, alongside Deanna, April, and myself, who will be diving into some of our own research and a toolkit that we published on this topic. I would invite all of you to introduce yourselves in the chat if you wish, with your name, your organization, where you're calling in from today, and any other info you want to drop in about yourself. You can feel free to utilize the chat for those introductions and also any questions you have throughout our presentation today. So just to frame up our conversation today and give you some context, with the support of the Kresge Foundation, River Network had the ability to research and publish a 2-part toolkit series that was focused on equitable climate resilience initiatives. The first of those 2 was published in November, and that's the image you see on the left, which is the cover of our Fostering Community Leadership Toolkit. That, like I said, was published in November, and we're currently supporting 3 groups across the country in developing their own leadership development initiatives for their communities that are really focused on grassroots engagement of emerging leaders. And the second part of that toolkit is the one that we are discussing today, our Fostering Community-Led Research and Knowledge Toolkit, which came out just at the beginning of this year. And that toolkit is currently helping us assist 8 organizations around the country on their own community-led research initiatives and supporting those folks with financial and technical assistance. So these initiatives actually go hand in hand very well. In our research, while we were developing these tools, we noticed that folks had used leadership development programs to structure their community-led research initiatives. And there were also groups using community-led research to identify and elevate emerging leaders in their own communities. So just emphasizing that these are two tools that work together very well. Even though we're focusing on community-led research today, we would encourage you to check out both of those, and we will drop the links in the chat for both of these documents. Also just want to flag that River Network is identifying future opportunities to support groups on community-led research initiatives. So at the conclusion of this presentation, we'll be distributing a Google form where you can fill out your information and any intention you have for pursuing this work in the future. And we'll save those responses and use it as a starting point for identifying groups for financial and technical assistance in our next round of granting. So just a little teaser for you to stay on through the end of the presentation today. Diving into our content. Let's first answer the question, what is community-led research? So some of you on the call might be familiar already. This also might be brand new information for you. So community-led research is a community-centered and driven research process where the community is gauged at each step of the research process. So the community is going to be engaged in deciding to even use CLR or community-led research. They're going to be engaged in designing the project, in implementing the project, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and then moving that data to action. So truly making sure community input is valued at each stage of the process, whether it's identifying what the problem is, identifying solutions to the problem, or implementing those solutions. In our toolkit, we have a little bit of a longer definition, a process throughout which community members come together to gather and synthesize their collective wisdom and knowledge in order to more fully understand how a problem or a set of problems impacts their community, to identify solutions that will work best for their specific community, and to build a case for support. So that's our lengthier definition, but once again, really just emphasizing that community members are engaged in each step of the process. And that mantra or that tagline above, nothing about us without us, is really what helps guide this principle. So talking about why to do community-led research, it really helps engage all segments of a community in the process of identifying problems and solution to those problems. So essentially, when we're talking about why to do it, we're trying to fully understand problems that communities are facing and get a really holistic approach to the various perspectives that inform those problems, and engage the community in finding a great solution. And it's really rooted in the principle that community knowledge is essential to solving climate resilience problems or any other problems that a community is facing. The various benefits to CLR are numerous. There's a couple here stated: vital data for problem solving, equitable solutions to community issues, strength and leadership building, as I stated before, connecting this back to leadership development initiatives, identifying emerging leaders that can really help sustain long-term approaches and solutions for various community problems, as well as relationship and trust building and bolstered advocacy. Using CLR helps create essentially an asset for a community, having a data set that is collected by the community and can be utilized by them to approach decision makers, whether those are elected officials or appointed officials, to help allocate resources for community issues. So we're going to go ahead and launch a poll right now just to evaluate our current audience's experience with community-led research. So there are 4 options to choose from. You can tell us if you've done community-led research before and want to try it again, if you've never tried it but you're curious, maybe you're currently involved in a community-led research project, or if you're working for an organization and you're not sure if you've done it before but you're still curious, let us know. We'll leave that poll open for maybe about 20 more seconds.
It looks like we have about 74% of our participants have participated, Hannah.
Yeah. Looks like maybe about 40% of the folks in this group have never done CLR before, or community-led research. So happy to have you all with us and learning with us today. Looks like about 18% of our folks today that are with us are currently doing a CLR project. So we're excited to hear about your experiences. We'll have an opportunity for breakout rooms after we discuss some of our case studies today, and we'll be happy to have you all share your experiences as you're going through your projects right now. Awesome. Thank you, April, for launching that poll. So with that being said, we have our two presenters today, Paulina and Sarah, who will be sharing some of their own experience doing community-led research projects in their respective communities. If you have questions while Sarah and Paulina are presenting, please feel free to drop those into the chat. We will keep an eye on them and compile a list and ask them at a question and answer break after both of the case studies have been presented. So I'm going to turn things over to Paulina to start with the Duwanish River Cleanup Coalition. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I believe Paulina had some things that she would like to share.
Thank you, everyone. And again, thank you so much for having me this morning. Before I get started, I'm actually gonna share, without talking, a little bit of a story slideshow to talk about our organization. And very quickly, I will come back and talk about our experience doing the work of community participatory research. So are you ready? All right. So, oh, that's not the beginning. 1 second, sorry. What is challenges, technology challenges nowadays anyway? Okay. So just a little bit about our organization. As I said, we are located in Seattle in the south end. Our community is the Duwanish River Cleanup Coalition. I'm sorry, our community is the Duwanish Valley, and our organization mission, and we had recently adopted a new mission because we were created to first just talk and advocate for the river cleanup, which is only one river in Seattle. But now, because we heard community, and the story is, you know, we don't only work around the river issues, but we are also doing all the other environmental injustices that are hitting our community here in the Duwanish. So in that way, we also added the promoting placekeeping, which is how do we, as we bring in the benefits of community improvements, we keep our communities being here, we keep them empowered, and we build that capacity. The story, as I said, I acknowledge the lands of the Duwanish Valley, and in 2001, just to give you a little bit more heads up, is when our river, the Duwanish River, was declared a Superfund site, and that's when we were created as an organization to be that voice, and this centering the organization, but a mission, but also the voices of who were impacted. To talk a little bit about our communities, we cover two communities, South Park and Georgetown, and obviously the South Park side, mostly people of color, and that's where we live. We share the lands with our industrial landscape. We unfortunately don't see back the economy generated in our backyards reflected into our communities. So we have in South Park, 38% are people of color, and we speak other language other than English. And we have also very high percentage of youth in the neighborhood. We still have a very high difference in the life expectancy. So if you live where I live in South Park, only my life expectancy is going to be 73 compared to 10 miles from here, it's going to be 86. So we have a very high difference still as we are speaking. So our main 3 pillars, and this is why it has been so important to talk about community participatory research, is how are we empowering community to be those centering the organization values, but also activities by bringing those who traditionally have not been invited to be and sitting on the table. And I don't mean invited to when the decision is being made, but since the beginning, just like the title of the toolkit, if it's about us, no without us. Since the beginning, we need to be designing every single policy or any single procedure with the voices of the community, because it's the environment that is protecting us, is the environment that is around us, and it's all about related to our health and well-being. For those of you who've never been in Seattle, it's just, I wanted to show you a little bit of what you see back there is the Space Needle, which is very not well known in the United States, the downtown Seattle. But then that is a good picture from my neighborhood if you're looking into downtown Seattle, where the Duwanish River is what brings all the industries and the economy, but also it's a very important habitat. As we are coming to the Puget Sound, we share the neighborhood with the industries, but I always like to say that always the residential neighborhood was first prior to the industries. The way that right now the river looks straight up was not the way that it was traditionally. So it was man-made to serve the purposes, to serve the economy. These are some of the challenges, but also I like to say opportunities that we see and that we have discovered through the different community participatory research that we have done. With lack of open space, it's very few compared to other places in Seattle. We have very youth programming, so that gave us an opportunity as an organization to be tackling that. And this is all the opportunities that we see through bringing our community and prioritizing what are some of the things that you're seeing impact in, and how do we turn it into opportunities to be working out with you. So air pollution, it's another threat that we have identified, and that is priority for the community, because we have not only surrounded by highways, but also because we have all these industries around us, about 120 industries every day producing. And, you know, sometimes I have been disappointed to hear people that COVID has brought all a pause into pollution in the neighborhoods or in general. It has not been the case in our neighborhood, because industries have been with lowered standards, and right now with the rollbacks that we had and we've seen since 2020, pollution has increased and has been even worse than any other times. So talking specifically about air, this is one very good example of what we did with our youth. We don't call it citizen science, we call it community-led science. So this is the way to be bringing our youth into making the best in the findings of the science, but also they are the ones gathering the data, they are the ones analyzing it, and they were the ones designing what would be the best method to get this out to elected officials to make a change. And then these are pictures, stories of how we do work as we are, you know, COVID was a very big hit for our communities, and I'm sure and you have experienced it as well. We had to switch into our usual day-to-day to also become that organization delivering basic needs. And that is something that sometimes organizations or government don't think, you know, how we see environment as the way of speaks of health, food security. So COVID was really a time for us to be serving directly to those needs. And when I brought it up to show you is because this is for us also an opportunity to check in with community as they were coming to pick up, you know, like we have been able to gather and to fundraise about $300,000 in rent assistance. But we were also giving trees, and, you know, like this is the intersections that we go through organizations like ours. But we take this as an opportunity to check on priorities as well, and how are people doing, and how are you being able to go through the days with the pandemic and then checking on the work that we do. At the same time, you know, like some of the things that we're hitting is a closure of a very important bridge here in Seattle. So we were able to be working with community alongside, because we realized that that was something that was impacting directly, bringing additional emissions to the neighborhood. So we were able to do some of the work in bringing the attention to the elected officials. So this is one of the examples that was is in the toolkit right now. And how do we make sure that we're checking in with community? So this is, for us, was a great way to create a community participatory workshop. So what we did is put a map together of the community where we serve. So that is Georgetown and South Park, the one that I explained. But what we really wanted to do is not just to have a meeting and to discuss what is to you, what is not working in your community, but rather having community identify themselves, what is healthy for them and what is unhealthy. These are easy, you know, participatory ways to get to community, rather than trying to brainstorm big topics with them. It's not going to come out of them, oh, I'm worried about emissions. But it's going to come out of them that I really worry about my son's asthma. He's been getting worse. And that's what we need to be listened to directly. What are those health concerns that people have that we can turn into policy and make a change? So that's, you know, we were trying to identify having them put in where they live, because that's another important thing. Sometimes when we come to, oh, let's have this discussion about climate, it's very overwhelming for community who don't speak English, who have other priorities, immigration priorities, for example, or they don't have food to put on the mouth the day after, to be thinking about climate. So in order for us to be taking realistic feedback is, okay, how do we translate this into the best priorities to be tackled, and listening to community. So that was a good way for us to give us the information. And then we heard, you know, like they were prioritizing, putting dots. Okay, so obviously asthma was a very high a priority for them, because they were worried about the life expectancy difference that they've been hearing through our workshops. And then they themselves, the community, is able to brainstorm what will be some good things that we can be doing in order to mitigate this. So it's not coming from the RCC organization, it's not coming from the expert, but it's coming from the community expertise, because we should be the ones defining our future and no one else. So this is what we try to do, empowering our youth. We have a very robust youth programming. So we go around and look for what the neighborhood looks like. And then we take them to another neighborhoods and look at the difference. And so they themselves can see, oh, why, how come? So one of, in this picture, I remember, this is not in our neighborhoods. This is in a very famous sculpture that is called it's in Ballard, Troll. But what they notice is that even though there is pollution in this neighborhood, there was a lot of people outside. And so when we came back to do the observations with them, they said, how come, Miss Paulina, how come there is so many people running outside? And how come there is nice parks around this bridge, even though it is surrounded by highways? So that's what we try to do, you know, bring them themselves the thinking. And so what do you think we should do, we ask, and then they themselves were like, we should be advocating for more parks and more trees in our community, so that way we can be out and we can be enjoying the outdoors. This is just one more example of what we do, and through the analysis, if you haven't been able to visit our website, which I will put in the chat, is the duwanishcleanup.org. This is the moss study that was just released. We took our youth out to be doing the sampling and the trees themselves, and then to understand moss as a bioindicator, and then themselves be the analysis. And we use this information to identify where were the hot spots, where the pollution is coming from, and identify. Then we take them to do some visioning, which is very important. How do we envision our neighborhood, taking the the expertise of our young people and also our expertise of our community themselves, they bring it to the parents. We don't even need to have a huge reach out to the parents, because they themselves becomes the advocate, and then they brainstorm back in the families in their own language, and then we bring it back to us for discussion and how to make changes. And so these are some of our activities that we do with them that have been identified, doing healthy home assessments, so we can as well build with the community air filters, for example, with air fans, with the wildfires. They were able themselves, the youth, to build and improve their health, but we do healthy home visit assessments to community, and it's a good way for us to also be listening up under where is community priorities. As far as green infrastructure, we have the partnership with some of the organizations on the river. It is important that we listen to what is being done, and so that they are here envisioning rain gardens and how we can be incorporating more funding for rain gardens and to add more green infrastructure in the neighborhood. Sources of pollution, what are the things? So we ended up listening that we needed more material, more collateral material in multiple languages. So we were defining what would be something that is big graphic. That is something that is so important when you are trying to engage community, that it's not easy to understand source pollution or source control. So how are we defining terminology with community is really what brings us to explaining back to community. So this was a graph that we were able to work with EPA and our youth in explaining what the sources of pollutions are in the water. And then we also do, some community engagement through also letting them know about the facts that our community still has 3 times higher asthma rates. And so we start brainstorming with, in our encounterings, what are the things that we can do to solve this? And this is one of the solutions that we got was we should be giving community more of those air filters. So I wanted to wrap it very quickly that, for environmental justice organizations, it's very important, as we have read into the toolkit, and then as we know that environmental justice is about bringing people's voices into the center, in the middle, at the beginning, and at the end. So how we develop the best analysis, the best policies, the best procedures, and make the government accountable is bringing those voices, and also being accountable to what the community has prioritized and want to act upon. And so one of them that I thought I would share with you, so we can now determine how we feel about our community in 10 years, full of mad regret that we didn't act to prevent another vital example of displacement and community disruption, or proud that we took more difficult but infinitely more equitable route of challenging the status quo. We cannot continue to do business as usual. And that is something that I am telling, the pandemic, you really taught us in a hard way. So this is the time to be listening to those voices that we haven't. This is the time to be bringing the power to the people that have not had that power. And this is the time to be doing transformational co-creation things with communities like the Black, Indigenous, and also people of color, that voices have been not heard and brought up. So I really appreciate listening to us, to me this morning, to our work. And I look forward to listening more, learning every day, and brainstorming with you the best practices that we can do to make sure our environmental justice communities get into a better place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paulina. If you all have questions for Paulina, please continue to drop those in the chat. We have a couple on our list already, but if you have any additional, please add those to the chat. And we're going to turn things right over to Sarah. Paulina, if you'd like to stop sharing your screen, I'll put Sarah's slides up. And we can turn
I'm trying.
here.
There you go.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much.
You bet.
Alrighty. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm from the other side, so it's afternoon here instead of morning. But thank you all so much for being here. So my name's Sarah Cannell. I'm with the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council. We're an urban river organization based out of Providence, Rhode Island, and we've been around for about 25 years. Our work has been to build and improve resources of and around the Woonasquatucket River. And it's really essential to this work to assure that the community living along the river is educated, activated, and has a seat at the table as we move forward in all facets of our work. Next slide, please. And this is where we are. Our key work is really in the lower part of the watershed in Providence, where the river has been most historically degraded and where most folks in the state live. We're pretty small here in Rhode Island, and our watershed is only 52 square miles, but we still hold 27% of Rhode Island's population. So a lot of our Rhode Island community is really impacted by the Woonasquatucket River. And so our project for today, I'm lucky to work for a team that does a whole heck of a lot of stuff. But our biggest community-led research project that we have at this point is called New Voices at the Water Table. And our goal is to work with frontline community members to build capacity and leadership centered around climate resilience. So sort of our process and how this presentation is going to be laid out is we selected a Providence neighborhood, the Onlyville community. They are extremely disproportionately impacted by a variety of different environmental issues that we will touch on. And then we're going to go through the different steps of engagement. So what we did to sort of lay the groundwork before the work began, how we brought in different community partners to make this work happen, and then the development of our New Voices program, which is where we are at now in this process. Next slide, please. So here is Onlyville in Providence. Onlyville is a densely settled target community for climate change issues like flooding and urban heat island effect. It's a predominantly Latinx community where Spanish speaking is very prevalent. And that was one of the biggest things as we were beginning this work is we identified immediately that a barrier that we would have in this work is not having Spanish speaking members on our staff. And that was a really key piece as you're beginning to do community-led work is making sure that you have all of the resources that they need to participate and feel comfortable in this work. So that was immediately a large need that we identified and realized that if we wanted to do this work, we needed to create measures on our end to make sure that we would have access and ability for translation and leading things in Spanish. Next slide, please. So Onlyville itself is the focus of a variety of climate resilience work as part of the Central Providence Health Equity Zone. So the map that we've got here is, it's showing that there's high runoff in areas shown in dark orange on the map just from a 1 to 2 inch storm. And this area is also the major shopping district for the neighborhood and their primary connections to other parts of the city. So you can see here that flooding is a pretty severe issue that has impacted this community already. So we saw this as a need for an issue that we were hoping to address. Next slide, please. Awesome. So this map shows that the Woonasquatucket, the lower part of which is tidal, has double impacts as we move downstream. when severe storms mixed with storm surge coming upstream from Narragansett Bay can create huge flooding problems. Onlyville was hit really hard by the Great Flood of 2010, which was considered a 1,000-year flood. All that means is that it's likely to occur once in 1,000 years, but unfortunately, because of the impacts of climate change, we anticipate these events are going to happen much more frequently, likely to really happen every 30 years. So we saw that there's this massive need to make sure that folks in our community are prepared and understand just how deep of an issue that this is. Next slide, please. And here are some pictures from the March 2010 flood. On the picture on the left, you can see the only supermarket and major shopping outlet for the neighborhood was completely underwater for almost a week, with damage for weeks afterwards. You can't see it super well on that picture on the right, but that's also the neighborhood's fire station that was completely flooded out. And this really compounds the problem of getting help during such a crisis like this, when the resources for help are being flooded as well. So it's a deep problem for sure. Next. Thank you. So we saw how deeply impacted our community was by a variety of environmental issues and turned that work into action, which brings us to the New Voices at the Water Table program. We're really fortunate to receive EPA, Environmental Protection Agency funding to make this work happen. And these are the goals that we were hoping to address through this work. But really our overall goal is just making sure that the residents of all ages in the community are comfortable and confident to speak out on climate resilience issues that matter most to them, centering what matters most to the community and making sure that we are addressing those needs directly. We're really hoping to give our community members the tools to work together and create the solutions for their community. And there's a real big importance to identifying gaps in projects and bringing in partners that specialize in those areas and share the same visions for the community. So we for sure get by with a little help from our friends. We have some amazing partners that we work with in collaboration to have the highest impact on this project. For example, the One Neighborhood Builders group is an amazing group who have deep roots in the Onlyville community and already have great collaboration and connection. So being able to work with them to make sure that we were reaching as many community members as possible when we were doing our outreach phase was instrumental in making this work successful. So it's always great to make sure that if there are any needs that you're hoping to address, bring in local experts that can help you through those pieces. Next slide, please. So our first step in our work, again, the amazing folks at One Neighborhood Builders, we worked in partnership with them for the Central Providence Health Equity Zone and did a survey in the community. This partnership took place in the summer of 2019 before we began our New Voices group. And it helped us gather critical background information on feelings around climate change from residents. And it helped us create a shareable resource for those who are looking to find ways to be more prepared for the impacts of natural disasters. With flooding being a major impact. Survey took place through in-person interviews and a SurveyMonkey adapted version. And it was really important to us that we were making sure that we were building incentives for folks to share their opinions. Our time is valuable, everybody's time is valuable, and that is really important in this work to acknowledge that when folks are sharing pieces, that they feel like their work is important. So we made sure to incentivize that by giving out price rate gift cards for folks that were willing to share a little bit about their experiences and feelings around climate change. And, So here were the results of our survey, and something that really stuck out to me as we were analyzing this work is just this clear connection between uncomfortability with the concept of climate change, but awareness that the climate is still changing, right? So something that Paulina really beautifully said in her presentation is, not necessarily understanding these connections, but still feeling that as our climate is changing, it's deeply impacting us, right? So maybe not recognizing that our weather events are changing, but knowing that my child's asthma is not getting any better, right? There's these connections, but they're not necessarily really concrete or easy to see. So it was very clear that this uncomfortability with this concept was something that we really needed to focus on and make sure that we were sharing information that was easy to access and easy to digest. Next slide, please. And so another product from our pre-survey work was the completion of a hazard preparedness film. In light of time, we're not going to share this one, but this is something on Vimeo I can share out afterwards, but it was a 5-minute clip addressing the 2010 flood and things that community members can do to be prepared in the case of flooding. Next slide, please. And another product of this, and then our first year of work, was the completion of a story map. We completed this map in conjunction with our high school environmental education program. And we shared this map as a tool to introduce community members to this issue and introduce them to our New Voices program. It shared all different elements of the historical impacts on our river, how flooding has impacted our community, and then what are some solutions that we can look forward to mitigate the impacts. And so we use this as our tool to share out in the community. If you don't know what a story map is, it's like a jazzy PowerPoint, but it's a really nice way to share out. Sometimes science can be really hard, right? It can be really hard to understand, and story maps take that data and put it in a really nice, concise way. And so we had a really high level of program applicants after they viewed the story map. We had folks complete an application to join us in our learning cohort. And we were able to work with our partners to fund stipends for all of our 20 participants. We wrote this grant before COVID, and I'm sure a lot of folks on this call are feeling that due to COVID, a lot of programs or projects have to shift and change. So one of the things that we made sure to do as we were moving forward in this work was we shifted and allocated supply funding for technology as well as any other barriers that folks may have so that we can participate in this work virtually. That was a huge piece, is just making sure folks have the tools that they need in order to actively participate. Next slide, please. And so this is where we are now. It's been a really wonderful journey to get here. These are our sweet folks from our New Voices program. We are in our 3rd session, which is very exciting. We've been meeting monthly and hosting bilingual Zoom sessions where we've been learning, collaborating, and activating ourselves on these issues. So the focus has been on community collaboration and leadership. And right now we're doing things virtually. We're really hoping to shift to some in-person learning opportunities as it gets warmer and as it feels safer for us to do that work. And a key piece of this is that we, at the end of the day, want to make sure that this is our participants are really driving the work. So making sure that we're getting and receiving feedback for where we would want to do in-person opportunities, what is the focus that we really should be prioritizing. We've been bringing in guest speakers. So for example, folks from the Office of Sustainability, the Providence Emergency Management Agency, bringing in folks so that we can build these connections, but asking our participants what they want to hear and what they want to see. We want our community members to continue to have an open line of communication so that they can actively participate in the decision-making process of mitigation efforts in their community. And that's been really important as we continue to build this program. And so here are our desired outcomes. Here's what we're really hoping to achieve here, but we're really planning on defining our success by seeing if we've empowered our community to have tools to long-term fight this major issue. Our role in this work is really just to serve as a connector and let the group take over to create their own solutions and focus on what they value most in their communities. We want to make sure that we're ensuring spots at the table are equitable, inclusive, and representative of the community we're serving. And we're moving forward with that in mind and making sure that we're keeping our group at the center of our focus. And that's it from me. So I don't know what happened to my email on there, but I'm happy to provide my email. Yeah, this work, I'm seeing a few things in the chat. I'm sorry I've been ignoring them. But yeah, it's been a really exciting process, and we're so happy that we're at this stage where we can really start working with our group and making sure that we can create some really cool projects from it. Based on what they identify as big needs in the community.
All right, let me go ahead and open us up for some questions. Alicia, thank you I can see you're monitoring the chat and answering some of those questions. So please, folks, take a look there. I guess one earlier question that came up, and if I might pose this also to Paulina, how do you sustain community engagement and processes that take a long time, sometimes years, before you can get to any outcomes? Given that you're dealing with a super fund site, you're looking at some long-term horizons. Is there any advice you've got for keeping people at the table and involved, even when the payout might be a while before you get there?
Thank you, Diana, for that also, great question. I think relevancy is one of the main things, how we make it relevant to what the community is prioritizing at that moment. What you cannot be talking about, the river cleanup right now, for example, when your priority is how do I get to be staying here in my home, but I cannot afford it anymore. So we have to talk super fund, we have to talk about the river, but we also have to make it relevant to what community priority is, which is affordable housing. So would I be unintentionally creating a burden for community by bringing extra parks, by making my neighborhood look better, but then also community gets worried and like, oh, my community is going to get beautified, improved. What's going to happen to the rental apartment that I have? Is it going to increase the rental because of it? So you can't single issue anymore. You have to work parallel, and that way community is going to continue being at the center because you are addressing what the main priorities are. And also Sarah mentioned something really important, that you cannot continue just thinking of community without recognizing expertise. So you have to make an investment as an organization. If you want to be in a meeting, in an evening meeting, where people, are struggling for jobs, you do need to bring some funding. And so none of our meetings are without recognition of time. So we do have recognized $25 per hour into participation. But also, whenever we were able to have in-person gatherings, we had childcare, we had food, You cannot expect evening meetings and then not have thinking about dinner, right? And then very importantly, language needs to make it relevant to whoever. Sometimes it's not just about the translation, but about the transcreation and the interpretation at the moment. Thank you, Diana.
Great, thank you, Paulina. And Sarah, is there anything else you want to add about how you structure some of those compensation for participants? There's a number of questions in the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually, the same amount we pay, $25 per hour for folks' time. That includes any virtual sessions that we're attending, as well as any in-person opportunities that may come up. And we do that through stipends. So one important thing to keep in mind, depending on who you're working with, is after you pay an individual more than $600, they have to fill out a W-9 form. And that may not be something that is possible for all people that you want to work with. So be mindful of the amount of time you're hoping people will give to your work, as well as any barriers that they may have in receiving that funding. But we send out checks at the end of each month, and I just have a big participation sheet. So I just make sure I keep track of every person that's attending and how much we're paying them per month.
All right. Well, thank you, Paulina. Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate you taking time to kind of share your work. There's a number of other questions on the chat box. So in the interest of time, I'm going to invite you to answer them via the chat. And so we can keep going through with the presentation. But thank you both. I think you've opened up a lot of lines of inquiry here. So let me bring it back to the toolkit. Hannah, if you might jump to the slide. So there's been a number of questions about whether community-led research can be applied to different issues, to different, how are we defining community? I will say our approach has really been centered around using CLR for community and climate resilience, but it is a strategy that has much broader application, and we'd welcome any conversation with folks afterwards around how you might want to deploy that. So in the toolkit, and April's going to spend a lot more time talking about these, so I'm not going to go through the series of steps that we outline, but I will say if you're thinking about leading a CLR project, there's a number of questions that the toolkit really invites you to ask yourself, and I'll just briefly go over those here. One is, does the data that you're thinking of collecting already exist? Because oftentimes just doing that early research, does that information exist that you can just synthesize it, compile it, share it back out in different ways, use it in your advocacy without having to, create a whole process to collect information again. The last thing that communities need is to be overburdened with requests for information that they have already perhaps provided in the past. So that's something really important to keep in mind. Also, it's important to think about the end goal. Just like we don't want to come back again and again for the same information, communities are overburdened with requests for information where they don't really see any outcomes from it. So thinking about what's the advocacy goal, what is the program, how is it going to inform the information, your programs, or how you want to talk to municipal government or other decision makers. What is it that you're trying to do with this information? Because at the end of the day, collecting information when there's no action afterwards is just burdensome, and really is extractive of the community. So something to be really thinking about, as well as, is your organization really positioned, best positioned to be out there collecting this information? Do you have the credibility in the community to really be, in the position to be, have the trust and the credibility to be collecting and being trusted with that information from the community? So, the toolkit, Hannah, if you can scroll ahead, goes through and really provides an overview of 3 different methodologies: person-to-person surveying, which could be done, door-to-door, or by setting up shop in some central spot in the community, whether it's, a church, a synagogue, a corner store, whatever that might be. Community mapping exercises that could be happening virtually or in person, where people are actually coming together in a space, perhaps around a paper map, perhaps around a Google map where you can drop pins and just start to generate information and develop a shared map, whether it's of challenges in the community or assets in the community. And finally, remote crowdsourcing, where you can use phone apps or websites to collect information from the community remotely and start to build a holistic picture of whatever the particular issue is. So the toolkit goes through some pros and cons and things to think about, whether you're deploying any of these methods or a combination thereof. Go ahead, next, Hannah. So again, really our focus, if to take a message out of the toolkit, the most important thing that we'd want to share is that it's important to engage the community at every step in the process, from deciding to do community-led research to actually designing the research and collecting the information. April, Hannah, and I right now are working with a cross-section of eight separate organizations who are planning CLR projects. And I know that we've all done a lot of work on the front end, just asking the question of these organizations, like who else should be at the table in deciding what the scope of this project is and what are the questions you're trying to answer, or what is the information you're trying to collect. So the toolkit walks through a number of considerations for really engaging the community at each and every step, so that this is really community-centered approach. Next. We already started to hear from Paulina and from Sarah about some of these barriers that get in the way of community involvement. If you want to just click through all those, Hannah, and you know, how do you make sure that you accommodate and support the engagement of community members, whether that is by compensating for their time, providing language interpretation services, childcare, meals if it's happening in person, but also as more and more of our work moves to a virtual space, thinking about the access to technology. And I think in the chat we saw that that's something that the Woonasquatucket folks are doing, providing some hotspots, etc. So really thinking about how can you budget into this project ways to address some of the barriers that could limit participation, thinking about the time of day, the transportation, etc. And Paulina addressed this very clearly, the multiple community priorities that community members are facing. Just thinking about one of the communities we're working with is Houston, and they were, you know, they're focusing on a survey around flooding. Well, guess what? In the last 3 weeks, they've been dealing with a lot of really front and center, you know, just lack of heat and electricity and burst pipes. And suddenly the community's attention is shifting to a broader range of issues. So really keeping that front and center in mind.
But we did have a few more things that we wanted to share with you as we wrap up our presentation today. And that is that the toolkit also includes a project planning and facilitation guide for community-led research. So that guide can support you through the entire community-led research process. And it has really good questions for you and your team to answer along the way. So next slide, please, Hannah. As we move through the next set of slides, we'd also want to continue to emphasize again the ongoing need to center community in all of these phases of the research. So to that end, we invite you, as we go through the remaining slides, if you have ideas for how you would engage the community during these different stages, to please share them in the chat. We'd love to crowdsource those ideas, and we'll compile them and share them back out to you later on when we follow up with you with the recording of today's presentation. Next slide, please. So starting with step one, the Community-Led Research Project Planning and Facilitation Guide will walk you through questions you and your team will want to answer as you establish your project team, such as who needs to be represented on your team? What are their responsibilities? How will decisions be made? Will the team members be compensated? What's the meeting frequency, the location, and the format of your meetings? And how will your team communicate and make decisions? So please add to the chat your ideas for how you might center the community in helping answer these questions. Next slide, please, Hannah. So the project planning and facilitation guide will also walk you through step 2 and help you get clarity on the purpose of your project, which we all know is really key to ensuring the success of our projects as we move through the steps. So this part of the guide will help you get clarity and alignment with your team on things like why you're doing your community-led research project, what community needs the project will help meet, how you and others in your community will use the data that you collect. And again, it's just really important to ensure you and your entire team are really aligned on the answers to these questions as you move through the following steps. And of course, again, community involvement is really important to answering these questions. So we invite you to, again, share in the chat how you would center the community during this stage. Next slide, please. So the project planning and facilitation guide will also walk you through step 3 by outlining questions for you and your team to answer as you scope out what type of project you want and need and realistically can carry out, such as what type of data do you need, how much data, from whom, and from where. Will you collect your data, or when will you collect your data? And over what period of time will you collect it? And will you need to verify the validity of the data that you're collecting? It also can help walk you through questions like, what's your budget? And how many people do you have to help you collect the data? Also, what's your community's bandwidth for participating? And does the community members, do they have the access to the technology or transportation or other factors that may impact what kind of research you really end up wanting to do? And finally, to what degree do you want your project to help you and your organization strengthen relationships with community members? And how does that impact the kind of research you do? So again, please share in the chat how you would center the community in helping you answer those kinds of questions. Next slide, please. The project planning and facilitation guide will also walk you through step 4 by outlining questions to help you choose your method or methods that you want to use, plan your research based on the method or methods that you picked. Think about if you will ask questions that will give you quantitative or qualitative answers and what the implications are of which one you choose. Help you think about how you'll ensure that you get reliable data that you can rely on. Also, questions that can help you think through how you'll mobilize really great, robust community participation from those you really want and need to participate in the research and give you the data that you're seeking. So again, please feel free to add in the chat how you'd center community in helping you answer those questions. And then next slide, please. And finally, the project planning and facilitation guide will walk you through step 5 by outlining questions to support you in implementing your project and collecting the data, particularly how it relates to how you will monitor, evaluate, and adapt your process. So it'll help you think through how you're making sure that you get the level of participation you need, the quality and quantity of data that you need, and if you're meeting your secondary objectives. And then Hannah, the next slide, please. And then finally, the project planning and facilitation guide walks you through the final step by outlining questions that you and your team can answer to determine how you're going to use the data that you collect in order to support your advocacy and in order to address and meet those really important community needs, getting back to the purpose and how you're going to use that data to help you get those things that you and your community need. And then Hannah, if you could move to the next slide, please. The final thing that I want to emphasize that's included in the toolkit is we have a ton of great resources and references in the toolkit. There's so much great work that's been done on community-led research, people that have done really tremendous work that we reference in the toolkit. And so there's a lot more great examples that we highlight in addition to the 3 case studies that are in there from Paulina and Sarah, and then another organization in Portland, Oregon. So that's another resource that you can lean on with the toolkit. And then Hannah, if you can move to the next slide. The final thing that we want to include is a link to a Google form where you can tell us if you're interested in getting financial and technical support to help you implement a community-led research process. We are currently assisting 8 organizations around the country, and we anticipate the opportunity to provide more of that assistance later this spring or early this summer. So click on that link and let us know if you'd like us to follow up with you about that. And then Hannah, if you could click ahead to the final slide. The next slide, please. We also are going to include a link to an evaluation. We really hope that you got something out of being present here today. We certainly appreciate all of you being here today and the great questions you asked, for the great conversations in your breakout rooms, and all the great work you're doing in your community. And we would really love to have your feedback. So if you could please take 5 minutes and tell us and give us your feedback from today, we would really, really appreciate it. And it makes a big difference for us. And then we'll also include in there some links to the toolkit again and the leadership toolkit as well. And we are at time. So I want to again say a big thank you to Sarah and Paulina and Hannah and Deanna for this really great presentation today, for sharing this story and these resources, and to all of you for the great work that you're doing in your communities. We will follow up and send you a link to the recording today, as well as links to the toolkits and the other resources that we shared. Deanna and Hannah, anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
No.
We just have immense gratitude for all of you for being here today and all the great work that you're doing. So thank you very much.